first, again, extend our thanks and deep appreciation to Sharon for hosting us in this. We're just calling this the MHT, the Magic House of Torah. It sounds like something Shlomo Carlebach should be singing in, but alas, you'll stuck with me. As I have had occasion to mention many times with great thanks, our shiurim all take place within the embrace and under the umbrella of this Beit Bible congregation, Beis Shalom of South Riverdale, and it gives me great pleasure this time to be able to introduce our host and founder, the very honorable, trust me, the very, very honorable Mark Friedlander, who would just like to say a couple of words before we begin the shiur.
Good. First of all, I'd like to apologize for having missed the first few, in the series of lectures. I was out of town, first in Florida, then in California, but I'm glad to be back, and I get them, Marina sends them to me, on the videotape, as they used to say, so I get to see them anyway. But I would just like to mention that we have, as of 2018, begun to have the monthly Shabbos morning davening on the first Shabbos of each month, going back to that system. So all of you who are possibly within walking distance are very welcome to come Shabbos mornings at 9 o'clock. First Shabbos in February and in March. April, it's to be the second Shabbos because of Pesach, and then the first Shabbos in May and June as well. We haven't thought beyond that at this point as to scheduling. So we'd love to see anyone who is within walking distance for Shabbos morning and conveniently can make it. The second thing is, a lot of you have very kindly opted to join as members of the STC. It's a large amount, but you've managed to do it. It's $25 a year. And occasionally we do have some expenses, so it does help. So if you want to do that, I just want to remind you that our year is July 1 to June 30. So you missed the taxable deduction year of 2017. But for the year 2017-2018, through June 30th, we're still accepting the dues of $25. And as I tell everybody in the Minyan, you get the same number of aliyahs whether you give the $25 or not. We don't really care that much who is a member, who's not. But if you want to, that's the way you do it. Okay, so I just wanted to let you know about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving your home.
I don't have to walk outside.
Thank you so much, Mark. We return to our investigation of one of the most enigmatic figures in the entire Tanakh, and Shimshon. And just as a kind of a brief recap for those who may have missed one or both of the first two installments of this trilogy, Shimshon's life, as it is presented in the book of Judges, breaks down into three principal components. The first component, although technically speaking, as we've said, a prequel, in other words, he isn't born until the last verse. He gets a whole chapter in utero. That more or less defines the contours of the childhood environment in which he was raised. The angelic charge, which is given first to his mother and then reinforced with a second visit from the angel to his mother and his father, and these special restrictions which apply to him mysteriously, the cutting of the hair, the drinking of wine. Pointedly, unlike other Nazarites, he is not restricted from contact with the dead, and that comes in handy since he spends the most active part of his life shedding blood in the name of Israel's redemption from the yoke of Philistine tyranny. So it is handy that he feels quite at home among dead bodies. Is sort of, you know, the Philistines' Joel Simon, so to speak, helping them into the next world at every chance he gets. Well, he'll know he got a shout out. You know, Riverside can use all the advertising we can give them. So if this first segment represents his childhood, the segment which we discussed last week, which is the two center chapters, 14 and 15, I would say represent his young manhood, adolescence with all of its sexual turbulence as well as its impulsive violence. That is the core of his career. Unfortunately, he faces something like the life of a baseball player, that he's still a young man when he seems to go into retirement. He leaves the mound on a high after having slain quite a number of Egyptians with the jawbone of the ass.
Philistines.
By the Philistines, what did I say, Egyptians? They wish they could be Egyptians. Want to be Egyptians.
Back in yesterday's parsha.
Back in the bar, I can't help it. Ever since I saw Johnny DeZick's bow tie, I have been fixated on the parsha. I can't quite get out of it. I can hardly wait for his bechuko tie, which I am arranging to be out of town for. At any rate, I digress. So it was Philistines. I feel that I should take one moment in order to raise the literary profile of this group to tell the famous story about Voltaire. And Voltaire was at a particular soiree when his razor wit was at its sharpest, and his repartee just astonished everyone. And he was heard bragging, "This evening I slew 1,000 Philistines." And someone remarked, "Yes, and with the same weapon." At any rate, so in that turbulent center passage, we see how Samson uses his relationships with Philistine women as a way to insinuate himself into Philistine culture. He draws upon himself various insults and betrayals, and uses these as a trigger for his acts of vengeance. Now, these acts of vengeance serve a symbolic purpose. The purpose that they serve is to let the Philistines know that the Jewish people are not a cowardly and an abject people. That manliness, if you will, heroism, even ferocity, are in our genetic code somewhere, and they best beware. They should know that the pliancy of the Jewish people, their willingness to accept domination, is something that will not last forever. Right? And so Shimshon is a kind of a symbol. It's very interesting. Unfortunately, the name has eluded me, but there was a famous Jewish boxer in England in the 1790s who actually successfully competed against the greatest English pugilist of the time. And it is said that there were more Englishmen focused on that fight than there were on the events taking place in France at the same time, the beginnings of the French Revolution. This gentleman was extremely important because symbolically he began to roll back the assumptions that the British people had about Jews, which were largely based on literary figures like Shylock. And so there are periods in history when a single individual can have a great impact on the cultural assumptions. So the beginning of the Philistines' worries about these captive Jews begin with Samson. And of course, we'll have their denouement under David later on. However, it is very important to remember with Samson, as we examine this central period of his life, where he functions almost as a folk hero, right? To make this impression, to create a changed sense of what might be expected from a Jew, and by extension from the Jews, that the prediction with which his life began was also the great burden that he carried. Because if you remember the words of the prophecy to his mother, the words that were not repeated when the angel came back to instruct his father, the words, V'hu yachel lehoshia es Yisrael miyad Philishtim. He will begin to deliver the Israelites from the hands of the Philistines. In other words, from the very beginning, Shimshon functioned under limitation. This sense of limitation, the sense of a beginning which cannot find an end, the sense of a life doomed never to cross the T's or dot the I's, is something which I would like to suggest in today's reading is a very important element to understand the last chapter in Shimshon's life. You see, because if in the first chapter we deal with childhood, in the second chapter we deal with adolescence and young manhood, a kind of the climb up the mountain. The last chapter, chapter 16, is the chapter which deals with the realization that life is limited and that one does not always accomplish everything one wishes. It's if you might call it the legacy crisis, the sense of unfinished business, an unworthy fragment. Where do I see this picture? First of all, at the end of our last shiur, the Tanakh finishes the 14th chapter, which what sounds like a kind of a conclusion. It simply says, "Vayishpot es Yisrael b'mei Philishtim esrim shana." And Samson served as a judge in Israel in the days of the Philistines for 20 years. Now, as we mentioned once before, but I'll refresh you, biblical time spans, periods. I just see Danny's just chomping at the bit to give some illustrations. I'm sure he'll be able to. A complete period, so to speak, is considered 40 years. Right? 40 years in the desert, the 40-year reign of King David. When you have something which is the neat half of that, 20 years, the sense that one has a half of a something. Shimshon ends his active life, as we believe it's coming to an end. He leaves the mound, and he in effect becomes the commissioner of baseball for 20 years. We have no idea what he does during those 20 years. There are no famous cases, no important precedents. It just, Brandeis he wasn't. Right? We don't know anything about the judging. And that would be a very normal, formulaic conclusion to a biblical character's run. What we have with Samson, however, is an extra chapter. The extra chapter is born in restlessness and dissatisfaction. One of the things that Ariel points out in his commentary, as we open the next chapter, have we given out any sheets yet? I think we can now give out some sheets. The last chapter, we've broken Samson's life into three phases. The last phase itself will be broken into three elements. The three elements will be, I can say this as you're passing along, the three elements will be the harlot in Gaza. Right? That sounds like a potboiler novel if I ever heard it. The Gazan harlot. I like it. The second phase is going to be called Delilah. The third, the only woman's name in biblical history that can possibly churn the blood as much as Delilah is Jezebel. These are the two great ladies' names. The third is going to be in the temple of Dagon, the dark chapter. Are we set? All good? Okay. So how does this first chapter, this first section begin? The first section is only 3 verses. And remember, it comes off that pseudo ending that we just saw. He judged Israel for 20 years. And so, as you know, in the old movies, this would be the block letters 20 years later. Right? You see Samson 20 years later, you know, a little gray at the temple, a slight paunch. And there he is. Vayelech Shimshon Azata, Vayar Sham Isha Zona, Vayovo Elel. Now everybody likes to get to the juicy part, right? To the dirty parts. He saw a harlot. But what is more important in this section are the first words. And Shimshon went to Azata, to Aza. Why is this so important? Because Shimshon has never been in Aza before. The other stories that we had basically took place around Timnah. Now, if you're not up on your biblical archaeology and history, these are just names. What do you care if he was in Timnah, he was in Aza, he was in Detroit? Who cares where he was? But this is very important because Timnah was a little town. It was very close to the Danite and Judean territories. It was kind of a frontier town as far as Philistines were concerned. But when you go to Aza, Aza is one of the great Philistine cities. This is the equivalent of a guy who made a big deal in Des Moines and 20 years later appears walking out of Kennedy Airport. Now I'm ready to take on New York. Right? So he's coming to Aza. The effort to come to Aza, I would suggest, and this is going to be a reading, it doesn't mean it's the only reading of Shimshon. The arrival in Aza is Shimshon's impatience, his disappointment. He doesn't want to be only the one who began the process of delivering the Jews. He wants to move it further, maybe even finish it. So when he comes to Aza, he is not just an old man searching for a fling with a bimbo to remind himself that he's still alluring. He is in search of the next installment of a mission which has been on hold for 20 years. This is like, if not now, when? And he wants to take on Aza. And he finds this woman, and we all know what happens, but if we don't, we can look it. Right? And it says, L'Azatim Lemor, the Gazites learn, Bo Shimshon Heino. Shimshon has arrived here. That means in the heart of the throbbing metropolis. Vayosobu vayervu lo kol halaylo b'shar ha'ir, and they laid wait, and they waited to ambush him in the gate of the city. And they said, when the morning light comes, then we're going to kill him. Why? Because they assumed that he would be all night with the harlot. Right? Because they assumed he paid for the whole night, and what Jewish guy is going to not finish all the food on his plate? Even if it kills him. Right? I don't care how much corned beef is on that sandwich. I paid for that. I'm eating. We don't know from doggy bags. We believe God gave us an internal doggy bag. We're taking it home. Here. So they assumed that he would be there all night. But he wasn't there all night because he got up in the middle of the night. And he was locked into the city of Gaza. Now remember that the city of Gaza was a powerfully fortified city. All of their national confidence was based on the fact that this city is impregnable. And they figured, he's not getting out of here, let's go get some sleep. He's going to get up in the morning, he's going to go to leave, we'll catch him at the gate, and he's ours. So what happens? Vaye'echoz bidalsos sha'ar ha'ir uv'shtei hamezuzos. And he took a hold of the great gate doors of the city and the posts which were on the side. Vayisa'im im havariach vayosem al ksevov. And he pulled the whole thing out along with the bar which locked them. He simply lifted it must have been colossal. And I mean, their midrashim they're talking about his shoulders being 60 amos wide, because that was the tradition of how big the gate was. I mean, this is really the incredible Hulk, right? And he lifts the entire thing. But that is, as I always tell you, that's not the interesting part. What's the interesting part is what comes up. Vaya'alem el rosh hahar, and he dragged them up a mountain. Now, I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not from the big lifters. But if I managed to pick up a thing like that, the last thing that would occur to me would be to schlep the son of a gun up a mountain. This is self-punishment. Why does Shimshon feel the need to schlep the gates of Gaza up a mountain? This is like carrying a piano to the penthouse using the stairs.
It's a good warning to the people. It's a good warning to them.
So Baron brilliantly says, this is to tell the Azites, you don't know who you're messing with. Right? However, that would be the case clearly, except that there are a few more words in the pasuk. And he took them to the top of the mountain, Asher al Pnei Hebron, facing the city of Hebron. Why would you schlep gates up the mountain in order to achieve a height from which it is visible in Hebron? Who's in Hebron? What began in Hebron? Hebron is the heart city of Judea. Hebron is, of course, the resting place of the Avos. Hebron is the place where David HaMelech's kingdom actually began. Jerusalem came later through conquest of the Jebusites. When Shimshon takes that gate up the mountain, one possibility is he is holding it as a signal to the tribe of Judah, saying the city of Gaza is now no longer impregnable. It is open for invasion. Kimarain, and do what you have to do. Yes, Jude?
Could it also be as a vision of the future Beit HaMikdash? Not exactly, but sort of.
Interesting idea. The notion of the sanctification of gates. to take them, to lift them up from their most vile iteration and to lift them and offer them. That's a poetic reading. That is a very beautiful idea. My idea is a little more prosaic. That Shimshon is trying to open the door to the completion of the mission of subjugating the Philistines. And if you recall in the previous chapter, it was the people of Judea who turned him over to the Philistines because they were so terrified. Now he holds up a symbol to them and says, the city of Gaza is the symbol of Philistine power. I have just ripped its gates. It is wide open. It's like a gaping wound. Go, come in, be my partners. And what do? They leave Shimshon silhouetted in isolation against the sky. When you think about Shimshon holding up the gates, is there any image that comes to your mind? The image of Moshe Rabbeinu holding up the luchos while the people battle Amalek. Shimshon lifts the gates, su'u she'arim, if you will, and nothing happens. Nothing happens. This, for a moment, recalls to us one of the most extraordinary, I would almost call it psychoanalytic or proto-psychoanalytic vehicles with which Chazal understood the character of Shimshon. If you want to know about Shimshon, you can go to one of two places. One possibility is to go to the Mishnah and the Gemara in Sota, where on Daf Yud in Sota, first of all, there is an unusual mention of Shimshon in the Mishnah there. It's unusual because it's much more like Aggadic material. Unusual in the Mishnah. Shimshon is actually mentioned in the Mishnah in Sota, and the Gemara elaborates with a number of traditions. However, if you want to find the other mother lode of Shimshon material, where would you look? I should put Mark on the spot for this. Also, Dr. Gill. This is about Korah Shai. You already have a hint. I'll narrow it down for you. After this, it's hardly, the point value is just plummeting. Parshas Vayechi. Why Parshas Vayechi? They'll show you. In Parshas Vayechi, you have the blessings of the tribes. When they come to the blessings for the tribe of Dan, the associations which Rashi makes, but which go much further back to all of the Midrashic literature, the assumption is, because basically, I'm sorry to say, Dan did not exactly produce 1 million movie stars. You know, in terms of celebrity Danites, there's not that big a list, right? There's Hushim, like the deaf guy. Okay, but he's plays his part early. He gets his little bit of midrash. But the main star, the moment when the tribe of Dan strides onto the national stage, is really only with Shimshon. And so the blessings of the tribe of Dan become the locus for the consideration of what is the inner character of Shimshon. It's almost a kind of a shorthand to his what Joyce would call the epiphany. In other words, the essence of his nature. And the Midrash Tanchuma in Vayechi says that Dan is compared to a serpent. Can we have the pasuk again, please, Martin? Nachash alei derech. He is called a serpent on the road. And the Midrash Tanchuma says all of the creatures of nature have mates. They have partners. The Nachash is Yechidi. The Nachash is a lonely, solitary creature. Now, clearly the Midrash was not doing great research on herpetological reproduction, because the truth of the matter is, snakes in their own way are quite romantic. As compared to toads, for instance. I mean, we're not talking Maurice Chevalier here. I've never seen a snake with a straw hat and a cane talking about every little breeze seems to whisper Louise. Then again, I've never known a snake named Louise. But snakes, in the eyes of the Midrash, are symbols of loneliness, of a kind of a solitary anger, a solitary bitterness. And that is what is associated with Shimshon. And so in this chapter, the first image we have, the man who only has half a mission to his credit, is this tragic sight of a figure beckoning someone, come and be my partners in this work. Shimshon is, in a sense, he's like a Moshe without an Aaron. He's just the guy at the top of the mountain alone. Now we go into phase B. When we begin to identify that Shimshon, coming to the end of his life, is someone in search of the second half of his mission. He is someone aching for a true partnership, for a connection. I mean, Shimshon never has a real conversation, certainly not with a male. The closest he ever gets are the pseudo-friends who come to be part of his wedding party. Right? So Shimshon now, for the first time since we have met him, where's Ben? Is finally going to have a connection with a woman who actually has a name. Delilah is the first named woman in the story of Shimshon. And there is something very interesting about her, which is in what is not said. So now I have to read to you, but I need you to hear what I'm not reading. How's that? Okay, I'm on verse 4, so that gives you choices in Hebrew and English. The whims of Delilah. I went a little crazy with these titles. Vayehi acharechein, vayehav isha benachal sarek, u'shema Delilah. And it was thereafter he loved a woman in the wadi or the valley Sarek, and her name was Delilah. What have we never said? Boy, must have been a lot of parties last night. What? Oh, sharp. Redeemed yourself from missing the Don question.
Doesn't that usually connote that something bad is about to happen?
Yeah, and in this case it does.
Yeah. No, but it's in the Megillah, I think.
Yeah, there's a whole midrash. What is not written here is, which all of you in your childhood versions of this that play quietly in your imagination, everyone assumes that he fell for another Philistine broad. Tanakh does not say that Delilah was a Philistine at all.
Maybe she converted.
Maybe she, from what?
From being a Philistine.
Why do you think she's a Philistine at all? And I will give you further indication. It doesn't say. And what happens? Vaya'alu eleha sarnei Philistine. And the chieftains of the lords of the Philistines went up to her, meaning she was not living among them. They send a delegation. And remember the delegation before? When the delegation came to Shimshon's his Philistine bride, there they said, if you don't cooperate, we're going to burn you out. They don't threaten Delilah with burning anything out. They simply offer her a huge bribe to sell Shimshon out. Has anyone sold him out before?
Yes.
Yeah. The Judeans. The Judeans caught him and turned him over. It's only by virtue of the fact that he refused to engage in conflict with his own co-religionists that he allowed himself to be turned over to the Philistines. Yes?
Well, but last week we said that Judeans refused to hide him after he burned the fields with jackals. And Judeans were trying to protect his reputation. They didn't want the Philistines to call him Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Oh. Oh. Thank God you can clean up these tapes. Good one, Dr. Okay. I really don't know what to say after that, honestly. That was adorable. Okay, so there is a very strong likelihood that Delilah was not a Philistine, perhaps even an Israelite. So now the entire story of Delilah changes. And the fact that she is given a name, and the fact that it actually uses the L word, Vayehav Isha, he loved her. It doesn't say she was Yashar Be'einav, as was his previous engagement, because she was the right one in order to do his mission. Shimshon is not functioning this time as mission yet. What is he functioning? He's functioning as a lonely, solitary figure who is beginning to grow old, but just can't stand to be alone any longer. And when Delilah puts him through the program, right, asking him the questions, there are two words that unbidden spring upon your mind when you read this. Darn fool! Like, don't you know what she's doing? But if you understand that Delilah was not Philistine and possibly Jewish, and that he actually loved her, and that what she keeps saying to him is, prove to me that you love me. And then if you line up, I'm not going to go through it because of time, each of the misleading answers that he gives her are actually hints. Closer and closer hints that it's about the hair, dummy. Right? It begins with strings, and then it goes to ropes, and then it actually goes to plaited hair caught in the weaving mechanisms. He's giving her more and more hints. Why? Why does Shimshon want to reveal himself to this woman? He loves her. What's he looking for? What? Faith.
Loyalty.
Loyalty. Good.
Closeness.
Closeness. Anybody else? He wants true partnership. This is the man whose own parents never understood what he was doing. One day he wants someone to say, "What are you doing today?" And he can actually tell them. And the Philistines who were there in hiding, why are they hiding? Because they're protecting their investment. They're there to see if she will deliver to earn her huge bribe. Shimshon never knows that there are Egyptians. When she says, the Philistines are upon you, Shimshon, each time he thinks it's part of the game that she really wants to know his heart. I don't think he's a fool. I think that there is a pathos. The pathos in what it means to be alone with a mission from God, when indeed you're not even sure how to move that mission forward. mean, I try to imagine, and maybe some might object to this comparison. I try to imagine what the life of the Lubavitcher Rebbe Zatzal was like after the Rebbetzin died. Because everyone associated with the Lubavitcher Rebbe was essentially someone he took care of. To whom could he open his great heart and his vision for Am Yisrael once his Rebbetzin was taken from him? He didn't have children, he was this solitary figure. When you think about the existential cost of that, to be so self-contained, your mind boggles at the devotion to Klal Yisrael and Torah that it would take. Shimshon is perhaps not the same. And so the story of Delilah is the search for an intimacy of the mind, that someone can carry his mission with him. And when indeed she betrays him and he is taken off. And it's interesting that the first thing that the Philistines do is blind him. And then they take him and they need to make a mockery of him. Why? Well, precisely for the reasons that we began with. Because he is a symbol of the incipient power and determination of their subject people. And so they need to reverse the image that he has left in everyone's mind of the man who stands against 1,000. They need to grind him down. And they take away his eyes because I believe one could argue that in biblical literature, the sense of appreciation of the Almighty's plan is something which is sometimes stated in visual terms. When Moshe Rabbeinu says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hareini no es kivodecha, show me your glory, and the Ribbono Shel Olam responds, Ki lo yireini ha'adam v'chai. No one can look at me and live. Shimshon, who is in search of the second half of the mission, who is not prepared to serve God as he has been ordained to serve. He's not prepared to be just the guy who gets it started. He wants the vision of the end. He wants to see where this goes. And so he ends up without eyes. And it is at that point, as we move into the third phase, the tragic third phase of the life of Shimshon, that along the road we pick up the companionship of John Milton. Because Milton's Samson Agonistes begins in this third section of the third phase of Shimshon's life. And Milton's formula, Milton was a great reader of the Bible. Aside from being a great writer, he was a great reader. And so you read his formulation of this picture of Shimshon. Why was my breeding ordered and prescribed as of a person separate to God, designed for great exploits, if I must die betrayed, captive, and both my eyes put out, made of my enemies the scorn and gaze, to grind in brazen fetters under task, with this heaven-gifted strength. O glorious strength, put to the labor of a beast, debased lower than bond slave, promise was that I should Israel from Philistine yoke deliver. Ask for this great deliverer now, and find him eyeless in Gaza at the mill with slaves, himself in bonds, under Philistine yoke. That man was a genius. He was a true certified genius. He couldn't have painted a better picture with watercolors. Shimshon comes to this point, and what is really happening in this third phase, Shimshon is now fearful that having overreached, having tried to be an instrument of the completed redemption, he has forfeited even the successful completion of his role that was ordained for him from birth. That he was to be the solitary symbol. He was to be, for the Philistines, the Jew. The Jew. And to make them tremble for the time when such a one would be again, who would find the people behind him. And so when Shimshon prays to God, asks to be lashed to the support pillars of that terrible temple, what he is asking of God is to be restored to the place that he had been at the end of chapter 15. In other words, let me secure the place in history which you ordained for me from the beginning. It's like a tziduk hadin. He has made his peace with the limits that God has set on his life. The same tziduk hadin which Moshe Rabbeinu reaches when he agrees not to cross into the promised land. The same tziduk hadin which David HaMelech reaches when he is denied the privilege of building the Beis HaMikdash. To settle for a human life which is never more than one piece of the divine puzzle, no matter how great the individual may be. The last phase of Shimshon's life, Tomus Nafshi im Pelishtim, is an acceptance of the end of life as a fragment of something better. It means I don't need to do more in order to be satisfied that my life has been sufficient. And so Shimshon, in his extraordinary final moments, when he calls out to the Ribono Shel Olam in that prayer, which is so visceral, it's almost stripped of poetry. Vayikra Shimshon pasuk kaf ches. Vayikra Shimshon el Hashem vayomar Hashem Elokim zochreini no. I plead with you, remember me, v'chazkeni no achapam hazeh, and restore to me my strength on this one additional occasion. Elokim v'inokmo nikam achas mishtei einai miplishtim, so that I may at least take revenge for one of my two eyes. That notion of one of my two eyes, almost saying, I have lived a one-eyed life. I have lived a one-eyed life because no one can see the whole picture. One of my eyes you took. Ribono Shel Olam took one because no one gets both. The other, the one eye that I was given to see my part in the great drama, the one eye which was given to me to be useful to the Ribono Shel Olam and to Klal Yisrael, albeit not in the end the Redeemer, that's the one that Pelishtim took as a punishment because I wasn't satisfied with my one eye. And so by pulling the temple down, I ask you, give me back just that. give me back my life with all of its limitations. Give me back my point of view, albeit fractured and fractional. And that is all I will ever ask of you. And with that, he pulls down the temple, and it says that in Pasuk Lamed, beautiful, Vayiyu hamesim asher hemis b'moso, and those, the dead whom he killed in the moment of his own death, Rabim me'asher hemis b'chayav. They were greater in number than all of those he slew during his lifetime. This, my dear friends, this comparison is not casual statistics. This is talking about the value of what he did, the value of his impact in beginning the dismantling of the Philistine threat, to have reached this moment when he has not only lived the life of fractional contribution, but when he has faced his ego's frustration with only being part of the answer, when he has come to terms with it, when he has made his peace with it, it is in that he makes his most heroic contribution. That he agrees to settle into the destiny which was set for him from the beginning. V'hu yachel, he will be the beginner. And he does more with that. And then the end of the chapter is so beautiful. It says, V'hu shafat es Yisrael esrim shana. And he judged Israel for 20 years. It means that the same line that was used at the end of the previous chapter, the line which was the summation of a solid half a career, is in a sense risked, questioned, almost lost, and then secured and reinstated at the end. That Shimshon lived up to his destiny, not only because he couldn't do more, but in the end, as one who had come volitionally to accept it, to countersign, if you will, the Almighty's script for him, and to agree, I will not be Moses. I will not be David. I will not be Solomon. I tried to be Shimshon. And with that to seal his history. Yes?
And that's the other meaning of the one eye. Because the vengeance, the one eye is his part, and vengeance for the other eye is yet to come.
Interesting. So in other words, it's the idea of sharing the vengeance with God, realizing that he can't complete it, or perhaps the vengeance for the other eye will be in the hands of David when he finally... Oh, by the way, where was Goliath? Where did the stone hit Goliath? Between his eyes. Maybe that is the other eye of Samson being revenged at a later date. Speculative. Thanks everyone so very much. Thank you. Sharon.
Very nice.